I was saying though, when you really think about Flair's success, him winning the world title from Dusty in Kansas City in '81. At
Hmm.
the time, I know that sounds like a big city, but in hindsight, Flair wasn't really over in Kansas City. Neither was Dusty. It was kind of a dead town based on anybody who worked there. They would say, "Oh, you never made any money there," blah blah blah.
Okay.
So it wasn't like it was St. Louis or it was Tampa or it was Greensboro, whatever. And so it just doesn't feel like he was really successful with that run. And then, of course, when he wins it back from Harley at Starcade '83, that's when the Ric Flair we know really, I don't know, came into his own. I mean, certainly he's got the gift of gab down. He's got the presentation down with the robes and all that. He still looks like Ric Flair, but for some reason it just didn't hit yet. Sort of like, I guess you might say, Roman Reigns a few years ago and Roman Reigns now. Like, okay, he's got the belt, but fans aren't really with it. Now maybe
Right.
they are.
Right.
You were watching, it was a part of your fandom. What do you think the difference in Flair's first run versus Flair's second run was?
TBS. The exposure he got there and the promos that he did on TBS, I think, was what made Ric Flair. And that's why when I think about that, and I could be wrong, but when I think about that, that is one of my proudest things ever in wrestling. That I was there for that ride, and that I held the microphone for Ric Flair through most of that.
Yeah.
Because I grew up again a Mid Atlantic Championship Wrestling fan, and I watched Ric Flair before his world title runs. I watched him as the U.S. champion, as the Mid Atlantic champion, as the television champion, as one half of the World Tag Team Champions with Greg Valentine. This was all before this version of Ric Flair, and we're talking about in the '70s, late '70s. So I watched Ric Flair was a big star in Mid Atlantic, and now as we move on and Ric Flair becomes the major star that he is, I was there for that.
Yeah.
That's that's really special to me. Really, really special to me. And as we moved on in later life, now I know him for the knucklehead he really is, and that's even special for me as well.
Yes.
Isn't it? There's three there are three versions of Ric Flair in my life. There's the Ric Flair of my fandom, the Ric Flair I held the microphone for, and the Ric Flair knucklehead that I know. It's something else. I never imagined being in Craigsville, Virginia, and watching Mid Atlantic Championship Wrestling that I would somehow be tied to Ric Flair
Yeah,
in
it
my
is
wildest dream.
crazy to think about when I
Yeah,
mean, when you step back, just as a fan and you're like, "Wait, what?"
yeah, yeah. But I really think going back to your question, I think TBS had a lot to do with Ric Flair's. Now I know he won the title in '83, and TBS came on like maybe a year later, a little bit late, more than a year later. Let's say 14 months later, 15 months later, in April of '85, and Flair had established himself as a great talker then. Of course, there was Mid Atlantic Wrestling, and there's one of the falls. There was Mid Atlantic Wrestling, and there was Worldwide Wrestling that he cut his teeth on, so to speak, as world champion. But don't you think it was TBS Studios that elevated him?
I mean, yeah, it's got to be, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
right.
WTBS, dude,
Yeah,
it's hard to really underestimate or even put into words. Like, how can we convey what a big station that was?
yeah.
It's
I
hard to
know.
even really do.